Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The obsessive neighbor.
Moving into a new house is supposed to be exciting, right? I remember the thrill of packing up our lives and starting fresh in a charming old place in a quiet suburb. The house had character, creaky floorboards, a big backyard for the kids, and windows that let in the afternoon sun. But as night fell on our first day, something shifted in the air. After settling in, I put the kids to bed and decided to enjoy a quiet evening. I wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch, the faint sound of their breathing comforting in the background. But then, a feeling crept over me, a nagging sensation that I wasn't alone. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to the excitement of the move and the unfamiliarity of the house. As I glanced toward the living room window, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement. I couldn't be sure. Dismissing it, I turned back to my phone, scrolling through social media. But the feeling only grew stronger, like icy fingers trailing down my spine. The next night was no better. The kids had settled into their rooms, but their whispers floated through the hallway, laced with fear. "Mom, there's something outside," one of them said, shivering under the covers. I reassured them it was just shadows, nothing to worry about. But deep down, I felt the same unease. Each night, the sensation of being watched intensified. I found myself glancing at the window more often, convinced that someone, or something, was lurking just beyond the glass. One evening, as I was washing dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling. I looked up, and for a split second, I swear I saw a dark silhouette outside. My heart raced, but when I rushed to the window, there was nothing, just the empty night. The third night, as I lay in bed, the whispers returned, echoing in my mind. It felt like someone was pressing against the window, their presence thick and suffocating. I told myself it was just the stress of moving, but the shadows were becoming too real to ignore. I started to question my sanity. Was I imagining things? The kids didn't seem to be sleeping well, and I couldn't blame them. I decided to investigate further, convinced that the old house must hold some secret I wasn't aware of yet. Little did I know, the answers I sought would only lead to more questions and deeper fears. The unsettling feeling didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. I began to notice small things that felt off. My children would huddle together in the corner of the living room, whispering. When I asked what was wrong, they exchanged anxious glances and shrugged it off, but I could see the fear in their eyes. It was as if they shared a secret I wasn't privy to. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I settled into the living room with a book, determined to find some normalcy amidst the mounting tension. But as I read, I couldn't help but steal glances at the window. The streetlights cast long shadows, and every rustle outside made my heart race. Suddenly, I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible, like a whisper brushing against the glass. I froze, straining to listen. Was someone out there? I crept closer, heart pounding, and peered into the darkness. All I could see were the flickering shadows dancing in the light. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But when I turned back, I noticed something unsettling, a shape just outside, too indistinct to make out but undeniably there. The next day, while the kids were at school, I decided to dig into the house's history. I spent hours online, poring over old newspapers and records, but found nothing unusual. Frustrated, I pushed aside my growing paranoia. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, it was just a house. That evening, I tried to keep the atmosphere light. I made dinner and played games with the kids, hoping to distract them from whatever was lurking outside. But the moment night fell, the unease returned. As I tucked the children in, my youngest, Lily, clutched my arm. "Mom, can you leave the light on?" she asked, her voice trembling. I agreed, though I knew it wouldn't help much. Later, as I settled into bed, I heard a thump from downstairs. My heart dropped. I grabbed my phone, using its dim light to guide my way. Each step creaked underfoot, and I felt the chill in the air wrap around me. When I reached the living room, I scanned the room, searching for the source of the sound. My heart raced as I noticed the curtains swaying slightly, as if someone had just passed by. Then, I heard it again, the faint whispering, so close it sent chills down my spine. I looked around, feeling a rising dread. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. Silence answered me, thick and oppressive. I was about to turn back when I caught a glimpse of something moving outside the window. I rushed to the glass, but again, there was nothing there. I pressed my forehead against the cool surface, straining to see into the darkness. Just when I thought my heart would burst from fear, I noticed a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. It was too dark to make out any features, but I felt its gaze boring into me. With a jolt, I stepped back, my breath hitching in my throat. I knew then that I had to find out what was happening, but my heart told me I might not like what I discovered. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, haunted by the silhouette outside the window. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be lurking just beyond the glass. The shadows felt alive, twisting and turning in my imagination, morphing into every horror story I'd ever read. I finally gave in to exhaustion, but even in sleep, the whispers returned, weaving through my dreams like a sinister lullaby. The next morning, I decided I could no longer ignore the unsettling feeling. I needed to take action. I called a friend who lived nearby, hoping she would come over for a cup of coffee and distract me from my mounting fears. As we chatted, I tried to keep the conversation light, but I could feel my nerves tightening. I found myself glancing toward the window every few minutes, half expecting to see that same dark figure lurking outside. When she left, I felt a wave of loneliness wash over me. It was just me and the kids, and the house felt larger and emptier than ever. That evening, I mustered the courage to set up some cameras around the house. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew I was afraid of what I might discover. After the kids went to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at the blinking lights of the cameras, anxiety coursing through me. What if I caught something? The thought both terrified and intrigued me. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to feel safe in my own home. As the night wore on, I played back the footage from earlier. The living room was quiet, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, just before midnight, something caught my eye. In the corner of the frame, a shadow flitted past the window. My heart raced as I paused the video, staring at the dark shape. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. I rewound the footage, heart pounding, and watched again. This time, I could see it more clearly. A figure, slightly hunched, standing just outside the window. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my phone and recorded the screen, determined to document every detail. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a notification. I picked it up, half expecting another message from a friend. Instead, it was an unknown number. A chill washed over me as I opened the message. I see you. I felt my blood run cold. Panic surged through me. How could they know? My hands trembled as I dialed the number, but it went straight to voicemail. Shaking, I glanced back at the window, and the shadow was gone. I rushed to check the locks on all the doors, my heart racing as I heard the faint sound of whispering again. It was closer now, echoing in my mind. I couldn't tell if it was real or just a product of my overwhelming fear. That night, I resolved to stay awake, determined to confront whatever was watching me. But as the hours dragged on, fatigue took hold, and I felt myself slipping into a restless sleep. Just before dawn, I was jolted awake by a loud thud from downstairs. My heart raced as I realized the whispers had returned, now accompanied by a soft scratching sound at the door. Frozen in fear, I clutched my blanket tightly around me, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. What was happening in my own home? As the scratching continued, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out what was lurking in the shadows. The scratching continued, a relentless sound that seemed to claw at my sanity. Each scratch echoed through the stillness of the house, wrapping around me like a vice. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, contemplating my next move. I couldn't just lie here, paralyzed by fear. I had to confront whatever was outside my door. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone, its screen casting a faint glow in the darkness. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and crept toward the bedroom door. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet felt like thunder in the silence. I paused, listening intently, but the scratching had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness. I opened the door just a crack and peered into the dim hallway. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched returned, sending chills down my spine. Summoning all my courage, I stepped into the hallway, the light from my phone illuminating just enough to guide me. As I reached the top of the stairs, I felt a surge of dread. I needed to check the cameras again. Perhaps there was something I missed, a clue that would explain the strange occurrences. I made my way down to the living room, feeling every shadow shift around me, every corner filled with an unseen presence. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the security cameras, their lights blinking reassuringly. I quickly pulled up the footage, my hands shaking. The screen flickered to life, revealing nothing but the empty room. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. Maybe I was just being paranoid after all. But then, as I scanned the footage, something flickered in the corner of the screen. I leaned closer, squinting at the image. There it was, the shadow again, moving swiftly past the window. My heart raced as I paused the video and replayed it, watching the figure with growing dread. It seemed to be watching us, its outline shifting and contorting in the dim light. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message from that same unknown number. "I know you're watching." My blood ran cold. How could they know? I felt a surge of panic, and I was ready to call the police. But then I hesitated. Would they believe me? Would they think I was just another paranoid mother? Determined to gather more evidence, I moved to the window, peering out into the night. My heart raced as I scanned the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the figure. That's when I saw it, a face pale and gaunt, staring back at me from the shadows. I stumbled back, almost dropping my phone, my breath hitching in my throat. It was as if the figure knew I was watching, a twisted game of cat and mouse. Frantic, I rushed to lock the doors and windows, checking each one meticulously. Just as I was securing the last window, I heard a noise behind me, soft footsteps on the porch. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My instincts screamed for me to run, but curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I decided to check the front door, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. As I approached, I felt the temperature drop, a chill creeping up my spine. I grabbed the doorknob, hesitating. I needed to know what was happening. I swung the door open, ready to confront whatever was outside. But there was nothing there, only the empty porch and the eerie silence of the night. I stepped outside, heart racing, scanning the shadows. Just as I was about to turn back inside, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. There it was again, the shadow darting between the trees in the yard, its form barely visible. Panic surged through me. I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me, the weight of dread settling heavily on my chest. I was being hunted, and I didn't know by what. I stumbled back to the living room, my mind racing. I had to protect my children. They were all that mattered now. That night, I barely slept. The fear clung to me like a second skin, every creak of the house echoing in my mind. I kept replaying the events of the evening, trying to make sense of it all. What did the figure want? And why was it fixated on us? As dawn broke, I could feel the tension in the air. I decided to call the police, my heart pounding as I dialed. When the officer arrived, I hesitated, unsure of how to explain the unexplainable. "I've been seeing someone outside my window," I finally admitted, my voice trembling. The officer listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He assured me he'd patrol the area but couldn't do much without evidence. My stomach sank as he left, feeling more alone than ever. That afternoon, I gathered the kids for a walk in the nearby park, desperate for some normalcy. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shadow lurking in the trees. But as we returned home, I felt a strange sense of relief. The sun was out, and I convinced myself that maybe I had imagined it all. When we got back, I prepared dinner, but an unease settled over me. I decided to review the footage again, hoping to catch something that would help explain the situation. As I sat in the dim light of the living room, the previous day's events flooded back, intensifying my dread. I started watching the footage from the last few nights, fast-forwarding through the mundane moments. Then, just as I was about to turn it off, I saw it again, a dark figure, lingering just outside the window. My heart raced as I zoomed in, trying to make out any details. But then, something shifted. The figure turned toward the camera, and I froze. Its face was a twisted mask of emptiness, void of any features. I felt bile rise in my throat as the realization hit me. It wasn't just watching, it was aware of me, and it was playing with me. Panicking, I rushed to check on the kids, finding them playing quietly in their room. I hugged them tightly, trying to suppress the rising fear. We needed to leave. I couldn't stay here any longer. Just as I was about to gather our things, I heard a knock at the front door. My heart raced again, dread pooling in my stomach. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. No one was there. I hesitated, torn between fear and the need to protect my family. But then, a chilling thought struck me. What if the figure was waiting for me to open the door? I backed away slowly, retreating to the kids' room. We needed to stay quiet, stay hidden. As we sat together in the dark, I could hear my heart pounding, each beat echoing in my ears. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging us into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the dim light barely illuminating the room. In that silence, I heard it, a soft scratching, like nails against the wood. I held my breath, praying it was just my imagination. The sound grew louder, more insistent. It was right outside the door. Panic surged within me, and I clutched my children closer. I glanced at my phone, the screen flickering as it struggled for battery. We couldn't wait for help. I had to do something. I decided to check the window, hoping to see if I could catch a glimpse of the figure again. As I approached, I hesitated, fear clawing at me. But I had to know. I slowly pulled back the curtain, and there it was, standing in the shadows just beyond the glass. This time, I could see its eyes, dark and soulless, fixated on me. It raised a hand, pressing it against the window, and a chill ran down my spine. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I yanked the curtain shut and bolted to the door. I needed to get us out, away from whatever was tormenting us. I grabbed my kids and whispered urgently, "We're leaving." As I fumbled with the locks, I heard the scratching at the window again, this time more frantic, as if the figure was desperate to get in. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with dread. Finally, I opened the door and rushed us outside into the cool night air. We ran to the car, hearts pounding, as I glanced back at the house. The figure stood still, watching us leave. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift, but I knew this was not over. Whatever that thing was, it had claimed our home, and now it was out there, waiting, lurking in the shadows. The fear had only just begun.
The obsessive neighbor.
Moving into my new apartment felt like a breath of fresh air. After months of searching, I finally found a place that felt right. A cozy one-bedroom nestled in a charming brick building in a quiet neighborhood. The walls were painted a warm beige, and the sunlight streamed in through the large windows, making the space feel inviting. I imagined myself making memories here, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I spent the first few days unpacking, arranging my furniture, and trying to make the place feel like home. I met a few neighbors, all of whom seemed friendly enough. But there was one who stood out, Mr. Thompson, the man who lived directly below me. He was in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and an unsettling smile that lingered just a little too long. Our first encounter happened on my third day. I was lugging a box up the stairs when I heard a voice from below. "Need a hand with that?" he called out, peering up from his door. I hesitated but nodded. He came up to help, chatting amiably as we carried the box inside. I learned he had lived in the building for years and knew it like the back of his hand. At first, his friendly demeanor was comforting. It felt nice to know someone was looking out for me. But as we chatted, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was asking too many personal questions. "So, what brings you to this part of town?" he inquired, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "Looking for a fresh start?" "Something like that," I replied, trying to keep my answers vague. I didn't want to divulge too much about my past, the heartbreak and chaos that had led me here. He nodded, a knowing smile spreading across his face, as if he could see right through me. As the days went by, I began to notice something odd. No matter where I went, it seemed like Mr. Thompson was always nearby. I'd go for a run in the evening, and there he'd be, watering his plants in the courtyard. I'd visit the local market, and I'd catch a glimpse of him in the produce aisle, his gaze lingering a moment too long before he turned away. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. I began to feel a creeping unease. Why was he so interested in my life? I mentioned it to my friend Sarah during a phone call. "You're just being paranoid," she laughed. He's probably just trying to be friendly. You're the new girl in the building. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A chill crept up my spine as I replayed our conversations in my mind. There was a thin line between being friendly and being intrusive, and Mr. Thompson seemed to dance on that line with unsettling ease. I tried to put it out of my mind, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But the feeling lingered, settling in the pit of my stomach like a heavy weight. I went to sleep that night hoping it was just a phase, a part of settling into my new home. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't yet comprehend. As the weeks passed, my initial excitement about the new apartment began to wane, overshadowed by an unsettling awareness of Mr. Thompson's behavior. It started as an odd feeling, like the hair on the back of my neck standing up whenever I thought he might be watching. But soon, it transformed into a chilling reality. One evening, I returned home after a long day at work. I was exhausted, my mind buzzing with thoughts of deadlines and responsibilities. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed Mr. Thompson's door slightly ajar. I heard soft music playing from within. He emerged, holding a steaming cup of tea, and smiled at me. "Hey there! I saw you come in. How was your day?" he asked, his voice overly cheerful. "It was fine, thanks," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral as I hurried past him. But as I walked to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been waiting for me. The next day, I decided to go for a run in the late afternoon, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. I left my apartment, only to find Mr. Thompson watering his plants again. He looked up, a knowing grin spreading across his face. "You should try the park down the street. It's a great spot for a jog," he called out. I forced a smile, but my heart raced. How did he know I was planning to run? I brushed it off as another coincidence, but the thought lingered. Later that week, I stopped by the grocery store. As I perused the aisles, I felt a familiar presence. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Mr. Thompson standing a few feet away, picking out apples. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and he gave me a smile that felt far too intimate. I quickly looked away, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. As I walked through the store, I overheard him talking to another shopper. "Yeah, my neighbor just moved in. Such a nice girl. Always so busy with work, though." The words made my skin crawl. I had never mentioned my work schedule to him. How did he know so much? That night, I decided to keep track of his comments. I started jotting down everything that felt off in a small notebook. "He knows what I buy," I wrote. "He's always around." Each entry added to my anxiety, reinforcing the feeling that I was being watched. Then, the messages started. It was a rainy Thursday night when I received the first one. My phone buzzed, and I picked it up to find a text from an unknown number. "You should be careful out there. It's not safe after dark." My heart raced as I stared at the screen. It felt like a threat. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see Mr. Thompson lurking in the shadows. The street was empty, but the sense of dread enveloped me. I debated whether to respond, but I decided against it. Instead, I called Sarah and told her about the message. "Maybe it's just someone playing a prank," she suggested, but her voice was filled with concern. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I don't know, Sarah. I just feel uneasy," I admitted. "I can't shake this feeling that he's watching me. It's like he knows everything I do." After our call, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The darkness felt oppressive, as if it was closing in on me. I heard a noise from the hallway, a soft thud that made my heart skip. I listened intently, straining to hear any sign of movement. Was it just my imagination, or was someone really out there? Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying the day's events in my mind, the intrusive comments, the text message, the feeling of being followed. I felt trapped in a web spun by someone who had no intention of letting me escape. I knew I needed to be careful, but deep down, I feared that my attempts to distance myself from Mr. Thompson would only escalate the situation. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in a horror movie, one where the villain was far too close for comfort. The days blurred together, each one marked by the same unsettling rhythm. I felt as if I was living under constant surveillance, my every move scrutinized by Mr. Thompson. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the anxiety was a weight on my chest, growing heavier with each passing moment. One afternoon, I decided to take control. I couldn't live in fear any longer. I needed to confront him, to assert my boundaries. As I made my way to the laundry room in the basement, I prepared myself mentally. I would be firm but polite. There was no reason for him to invade my privacy, and I was determined to make that clear. As I entered the laundry room, I could hear the soft hum of the dryer. I loaded my clothes, trying to calm my racing heart. Just as I was about to leave, the door swung open, and there he was, Mr. Thompson, his face illuminated by the fluorescent lights. "Ah, perfect timing!" he exclaimed, stepping in with a casual ease that made my skin crawl. "I was just coming to check if you needed any help with your laundry." "No, I'm fine, thanks," I replied, forcing a smile as I edged toward the door. He stepped closer, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you. I've noticed you seem a bit on edge lately. Is everything all right?" His voice dripped with a concern that felt far too rehearsed. "I'm just getting used to the new place," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm fine, really." He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms as if he had all the time in the world. "You know, I care about my neighbors. It's important to look out for one another, especially in this building." His words hung in the air like a threat. "I appreciate that, but I'd really like some privacy. I think we both need our space," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but it quickly transformed into that unsettling smile again. "Of course. Just looking out for you, that's all. You never know who's lurking around at night." He chuckled softly, but the laughter felt hollow. I couldn't help but shiver. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said, finally pushing past him and out into the hallway. I hurried to my apartment, my heart racing. It felt like I had walked a tightrope, and I wasn't sure if I had managed to stay upright. That night, I decided to check my phone, hoping for a distraction from my thoughts. As I scrolled through social media, my heart sank when I saw another message from the unknown number. "You should have listened to him. You can't escape your fate." Panic washed over me, and I felt the walls of my apartment closing in. I locked the door, double-checking the deadbolt before sitting down on the couch, clutching my phone tightly. I thought of calling the police, but would they take my fears seriously? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone in this nightmare. The following morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. I decided to take a different route to work, hoping to shake the feeling of being hunted. But as I left my apartment, I spotted Mr. Thompson standing in the courtyard, watering his plants. Our eyes met, and I quickly averted my gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That day at work, I was distracted, glancing at my phone every few minutes, half expecting another message. But when I finally checked, I was met with silence. It was almost worse than the messages themselves. The calm before the storm felt suffocating. When I returned home that evening, I was on edge. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being followed. I locked the door behind me and peeked through the curtains, watching the courtyard. To my horror, I saw Mr. Thompson standing outside, looking up at my apartment window, a smirk on his face. I backed away from the window, my breath quickening. It felt like he was waiting for me to make a move, like a predator toying with its prey. I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to find a way to escape this nightmare. That night, I devised a plan. I would stay vigilant, document everything, and, if necessary, I would find a way to move. I couldn't let fear control me any longer, but I also knew that Mr. Thompson wasn't going to back off easily. Little did I know, the confrontation was far from over. The tension in my apartment reached a boiling point. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, sent my heart racing. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly on edge. I decided to install a small camera facing my front door, hoping to capture any unusual activity. I needed evidence of what was happening, something concrete to show to the authorities if it came to that. The following days were a blur of anxiety and unease. I watched the camera feed obsessively, each time hoping for a glimpse of normalcy. But instead, the same unsettling patterns emerged. I would catch glimpses of Mr. Thompson standing outside, seemingly lost in thought or peering up at my window as if waiting for me to emerge. Then, one evening, everything changed. I returned home from work, the weight of the day pressing heavily on my shoulders. As I approached my front door, I noticed an envelope tucked under it. My stomach dropped. I hesitated, glancing around for any sign of Mr. Thompson, but the hallway was eerily quiet. I bent down and picked up the envelope. It was plain, with no return address or indication of who might have sent it. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing a single piece of paper with a message scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You can't hide from me. I'm always watching." A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back, barely able to breathe. This was no longer just a matter of discomfort. It was a direct threat. I rushed inside, locked the door, and felt the walls closing in once more. I couldn't stay here. That night, sleep eluded me. I replayed the message in my mind, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Every noise outside seemed amplified, each sound a reminder of how vulnerable I was. I sat up in bed, scrolling through my phone, searching for a solution. Should I call the police? Should I pack my things and leave? Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the unknown number. "You shouldn't have read it. Now you've made it personal." My breath hitched in my throat. Panic surged through me, and I fought the urge to scream. I slammed my phone down and glanced at the camera feed. I needed to see if Mr. Thompson was lurking outside again. I checked the live feed, and to my horror, I saw him standing right outside my door, staring directly into the camera. His expression was calm, almost amused, and my blood ran cold. It was as if he knew I was watching him. Feeling trapped, I tried to think of a plan. I reached out to Sarah, my closest friend, and told her everything. "I can't take this anymore. I need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "Come stay with me for a while." "You don't have to be alone in this," she offered, her concern evident. "I don't know. What if he follows me? What if he finds out where I am?" I replied, fear creeping in. Just pack some essentials. We'll figure it out together, she urged. After hanging up, I took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe getting out of the apartment would give me some relief. I grabbed a duffel bag and started packing my clothes, glancing nervously at the camera feed every few seconds. But as I was packing, the feed abruptly cut out. Panic flooded my senses. I rushed to check the camera, but it was dead. I cursed under my breath and fumbled with the cords, my heart racing. I could feel the oppressive weight of dread creeping in. Just then, I heard a loud knock on my door. My heart dropped. "It's me, Mr. Thompson. I know you're in there." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that sent chills down my spine. I froze, my mind racing. He had never come to my door before. "I just want to talk," he called out, his tone disconcertingly cheerful. "You've been so distant lately. Let me in." "No." "Go away," I shouted, my voice trembling. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just trying to help." His insistence grew more frantic. I could hear him moving closer to the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the hallway. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It felt like a hunt. I needed to escape. With my heart racing, I grabbed my phone and slipped out through the back exit of the building, hoping he wouldn't notice. I ran toward my car, praying I could get away before he caught up to me. But as I reached my car, I glanced back at the apartment building. There he was, standing in the doorway, watching me with that same twisted smile. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and drove away, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I couldn't go back. Not now. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The real nightmare was just beginning. I drove through the dimly lit streets, my heart still racing as the adrenaline coursed through my veins. I couldn't shake the image of Mr. Thompson's unsettling smile from my mind. I pulled into a gas station, desperately trying to calm myself. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air sending shivers down my spine. I needed to think clearly. I fished out my phone, intending to call Sarah, but hesitated. I had to be careful. If Mr. Thompson had been watching me this whole time, he might already know where I was. I decided to text her instead, hoping to keep a low profile. "I'm on my way. Can you meet me outside?" As I waited, I glanced around, feeling exposed under the harsh lights. My mind raced through the events of the last few weeks. How had it escalated so quickly? I should have trusted my instincts sooner. Just as I began to calm down, I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from that unknown number. "You think you can run away? You'll never escape me." My breath hitched, and I looked around, my eyes darting from one shadow to another, convinced I was being watched. Just then, I spotted Sarah's car pulling up. Relief washed over me as she stepped out, her face etched with concern. "Get in," she urged, and I rushed to the passenger side, locking the door behind me. "Did you see anyone following you?" she asked as we drove away. "No, but I got another message," I said, showing her the text. Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "We need to go to the police," she insisted. I shook my head, a sense of hopelessness settling in. "I don't know if they'll take me seriously. It feels like I'm losing my mind." "Just tell them everything. You have to do something," she urged. As we drove to the police station, I recounted everything I had experienced, from the strange comments to the threatening messages. When I finally finished, the officer listened intently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "It's hard to take action without solid evidence," he said gently. "Have you considered getting a restraining order?" "I don't even know if he's really a threat. He's just strange," I replied, frustration bubbling over. "Strange can be a threat. You should take this seriously," he advised. Reluctantly, I agreed to file the paperwork, hoping it would be enough to keep him at bay. After leaving the station, I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. At least I had taken some steps. But deep down, I knew that just filing a report wouldn't erase the fear that had taken root in my life. I needed to be vigilant. That night, I stayed at Sarah's apartment, the familiar comfort of her presence providing a small measure of safety. We watched movies, trying to distract ourselves, but every noise made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Thompson would find a way to intrude into my life again. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone buzzing. Groggy and disoriented, I picked it up to find a text from the unknown number. "You think you're safe? I'll always find you." My heart raced as I shot up in bed, panic surging through me. I glanced at Sarah, who was still asleep beside me. In a fit of desperation, I decided to call the police again. As the phone rang, I heard a soft knock at the door, sending chills down my spine. "Who is it?" I whispered, fear constricting my throat. "Sarah, it's me," came her sleepy voice from the other side. I breathed a sigh of relief and opened the door, but as soon as I did, my stomach dropped. Mr. Thompson stood there, grinning broadly, a wild look in his eyes. "Did you think you could escape me?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Before I could react, he pushed his way in, the overwhelming scent of something metallic and sweet filling the air. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said, stepping further into the room. I backed away, heart pounding. "Get out!" I screamed, grabbing Sarah's arm. We stumbled back, searching for an escape, but he blocked the way, his smile growing wider. No, we can talk. You're not scared of me, are you?" His voice dripped with mockery. I turned to Sarah, desperation in my eyes. "Call the police," I yelled. She fumbled for her phone, but the moment she dialed, Mr. Thompson lunged for her. "Stop!" I shouted, feeling a surge of adrenaline. I pushed him back, and for a moment, he looked surprised. I grabbed Sarah's hand and bolted toward the kitchen, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. As we scrambled for safety, I realized this was it. I couldn't let fear dictate my life anymore. I had to fight back. In that moment, I understood that it wasn't just about escaping him. It was about reclaiming my life. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, I prepared to stand my ground, determined to confront the nightmare that had haunted me for far too long.
The car without plates.
It all started so innocently that I didn't pay much attention at first. A black car, sleek and nondescript, passed me on my way to work. I barely registered it, but as I parked at the office and turned to glance behind me, I noticed something odd. It had no license plates. No numbers, no state, nothing. It felt strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe the driver had just bought the car, or perhaps they forgot to put the plates on. That kind of thing happens, right? A few days later, the same car appeared again. This time, it was parked near the corner of my street, the engine off, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I slowed my pace as I passed, eyes lingering on the smooth black exterior. Again, no plates. Just a shadow of a car, faceless, unidentifiable. It gave me a chill, but I kept walking, brushing it off as coincidence. It wasn't until I saw it for the third time, on my way to the grocery store, that my discomfort turned into something more tangible. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed it parked at the opposite end of the street. The same black car, lurking in plain sight. I tried to convince myself it wasn't following me, that it couldn't be. Yet when I left the store, there it was again, a few cars behind me in traffic. It moved with me, slow and deliberate, but always just far enough to seem inconspicuous. The unease started to creep in then, like a cold hand on my neck. Each time I saw it, my pulse would quicken, a prickling sensation at the base of my spine that I couldn't shake. Why was it always there? I began scanning for it everywhere I went, my eyes darting to mirrors, to parked cars, to side streets. And more often than not, I would see it, lurking in the shadows, just out of reach. The real turning point came one night when I was pulling into my apartment complex after work. I saw it again, parked right outside the entrance. This time, my heart skipped a beat. It was closer than ever before. I sat in my car for a few moments, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the black vehicle. The windows were completely blacked out, and there was no movement inside. No one got out, no headlights flicked on. It just sat there, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My mind raced. Why me? Who could it be? I had no enemies, no reason to think someone would go to such lengths. But that car, it was there. Always there, following me, haunting me like a shadow. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the car outside, wondering if it was still there, waiting for me. Every little sound, every creak of the apartment, sent a jolt through me. My imagination ran wild, filled with scenarios of who, or what, might be behind those dark windows. The next morning, I was almost too afraid to leave the house, but I had to. As I walked to my car, I cautiously scanned the street. The black car was gone, but the unease remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next few days felt like a game of cat and mouse, except I didn't know who the cat was. Every time I left the house, my eyes scanned the street, half expecting to see that black car. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was all a coincidence, and I was just overthinking things. But that idea quickly disappeared when I saw it again. This time, parked across from my office, facing the building like it was waiting for me. I stood frozen in front of the glass doors, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. My stomach knotted as I stared at the car, trying to see through the tinted windows. But as always, they were completely black, reflecting the cold gray sky back at me. Who the hell would be following me? And why? I wasn't important. I wasn't anyone special. But there it was, just sitting there like a dark presence I couldn't escape. The feeling of being watched was relentless. I could feel my nerves fraying, my thoughts unraveling as I tried to go about my day. I couldn't concentrate at work. Every time my phone buzzed or someone walked past my desk, I flinched. I even considered telling someone, my coworkers, maybe the security guard, but I didn't want to seem like I was losing it. After all, what could I say? Hey, I think a car without plates is following me. It sounded ridiculous, so I kept it to myself, letting the paranoia eat away at me in silence. That evening, I tried to change my routine, hoping to shake off whoever might be watching me. I left work later than usual, staying behind long after most of the office had emptied out. When I finally headed to the parking lot, I felt a strange sense of relief. The street was quiet, and for once, there was no sign of the black car. I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening a little as I unlocked my own car and started the engine. But just as I turned onto the main road, I saw it. The black car, pulling out from a side street behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and panic surged through me like an electric shock. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us. I could see it in my rearview mirror, keeping pace with me, always just a few cars back. I turned onto a random street, and then another, zigzagging through neighborhoods I didn't even recognize. But no matter where I went, it was there. Always there. The headlights followed me like a predator stalking its prey. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. What did they want? Why were they doing this? I wasn't imagining it anymore. Someone was following me, and they were getting bolder. I could feel my hands trembling as I tried to think of what to do. Call the police. But what could I tell them? I had no proof, nothing but my word that this car was stalking me. After driving aimlessly for nearly half an hour, I finally made a quick turn into a crowded shopping center parking lot. I parked near the entrance, where people were still walking in and out of the stores. For a moment, I sat there in my car, breathing heavily, watching the rearview mirror. The black car never pulled in behind me. It disappeared, blending back into the city like a ghost. I felt a brief surge of relief, but it didn't last. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I reached over with shaky hands, my pulse quickening as I saw the notification. It was a text message from an unknown number. You can't run forever. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might explode out of my chest. My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Whoever was in that car, they weren't just following me. They knew who I was. They had my number. And now, they were playing a game I didn't know how to win. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made my heart race. The text message from the unknown number echoed in my head. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message, or worse, a call. But there was nothing. The silence was almost worse than the message itself, like they were waiting for me to let my guard down. The next morning, I decided to go to the police. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. Someone was stalking me, and I needed help. I drove to the nearest precinct, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, scanning for the black car. But it wasn't there. Not this time. Inside the station, I explained everything to the officer at the desk. The car, the texts, the way it followed me everywhere, always staying just far enough behind. He listened, nodding politely, but I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was paranoid, maybe a bit stressed. But I wasn't. I knew what I saw. "Do you have any proof?" he asked, his tone measured. "No, not really," I admitted, feeling a knot of frustration tighten in my chest. "I mean, I've seen the car. It has no plates. It's following me, I swear. And I got a text message last night. From an unknown number. Here, look." I showed him the message on my phone, and he frowned, but it wasn't the reaction I had hoped for. Unfortunately, without a direct threat or more evidence, it's difficult to act on this. It could be a prank or someone playing a sick joke. "Do you have any enemies?" Anyone who might want to mess with you. I shook my head.
No enemies.
No one that I knew of who would go to these lengths. The officer offered to file a report, but that was it. No real action. No investigation. I left feeling worse than when I arrived, a heavy weight settling in my chest. That day, I tried to go back to my normal routine. I went to work, kept my head down, and did my best to push the fear aside. But I couldn't stop thinking about that text. It played over and over in my mind. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would lose interest. That if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. But that night, everything changed. I was on my way home from a late shift at work, the city quiet and the streets almost empty. My nerves were on edge, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting the black car to appear at any moment. For the first half of the drive, nothing happened. No signs of the car. I almost started to relax, telling myself that maybe it was all over. Maybe they had finally moved on. But then, just as I turned onto the road leading to my neighborhood, I saw it. Those headlights. Bright, cutting through the darkness like two eyes locked on me. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my heart slam into my ribs. The car was back. And this time, it wasn't holding back. It was right behind me, close enough that I could almost feel it breathing down my neck. I pressed my foot down on the gas, speeding up, but the car kept pace. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to stay calm, trying to think. What should I do? Where could I go? I couldn't lead them to my house. I wasn't about to let this thing get that close to my home, to where I slept. But there was nowhere else. Nowhere safe. I turned down side streets, hoping to lose them, but they stuck to me like a shadow, always there, always watching. Panic clawed at my chest as I made a sharp turn down a narrow, deserted road. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. The headlights vanished in the distance, swallowed by the darkness. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen, my heart sinking when I saw another message from the same unknown number. We're getting closer. A cold wave of dread washed over me. My pulse raced, and without thinking, I slammed on the gas again, desperate to get away. But as I sped down the empty road, I realized something horrifying. The car was no longer behind me. It was ahead. Out of nowhere, the black car appeared at the end of the road, its headlights blinding as it idled there, blocking my path. I hit the brakes, my tires screeching as the car came to a sudden stop. My heart was in my throat. How the hell had it gotten in front of me? How was that even possible? For a few moments, I just sat there, staring at the black car. The windows were still too dark to see through, but I could feel the presence inside. Watching. Waiting. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal with no way out. I thought about turning around, but there was no time. The car started moving. Slowly at first, then gaining speed, coming straight for me. Instinct took over. I slammed the gear into reverse, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I backed up, swerving into a side road. I could hear the other car speeding up behind me, closing the distance. The sound of the engine roared in my ears, growing louder, more aggressive, like it was hunting me down. And then, just like that, it was gone. I pulled over, panting, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The street behind me was empty. The car had vanished, disappearing into the night like it had never existed at all. But I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I barely slept that night, haunted by the memories of the car and the chilling feeling of being hunted. My mind raced as I replayed every moment in excruciating detail. The way the headlights had pierced the darkness, the sound of the engine growling like a predator. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being drawn into something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The next day, I resolved to take control. I couldn't live in fear any longer. I decided to set a trap of my own. I borrowed a friend's dashcam, thinking that if I could capture footage of the black car, I could finally prove I wasn't losing my mind. I planned to drive through the same streets where I had seen it before, hoping to lure it out. As I drove that evening, my heart raced with anticipation and dread. I retraced my steps, driving slowly down familiar roads, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. Perhaps tonight would be the night I finally confronted whatever was stalking me. I parked in the same deserted spot where I had last seen the car, waiting in silence. Time seemed to stretch, and with each passing moment, I grew more anxious. I turned on the dash cam, my fingers trembling as I adjusted the angle to capture the street behind me. Minutes passed, and just as I began to doubt my plan, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. My heart pounded as the black car came into view, creeping down the road like a phantom. It slowed down, its engine rumbling ominously as it drew closer to my car. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it. I had to be brave. I quickly grabbed my phone, ready to record, but as I looked back up, the black car had stopped directly behind me. I couldn't see the driver, but I could feel the weight of its gaze boring into me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and then I made a decision. I would confront it. I turned on the interior light of my car, casting a soft glow over the front seats, then opened the door and stepped out. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I instinctively shivered, but I forced myself to stand tall. I could do this. "Why are you following me?" I called out, my voice shaking but resolute. "What do you want?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then the black car's engine roared to life. It moved slowly forward, and my heart raced as I took a step back, half expecting it to lurch at me. But instead, it came to a halt just a few feet away. I squinted into the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver. The windows were still tinted, blocking any view of who was inside. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? Why were they doing this? And what did they want from me? Then, unexpectedly, the passenger door swung open, and I froze. A figure emerged from the car, cloaked in shadows. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stood rooted in place. As the figure stepped into the light, my breath caught in my throat. It was a man, tall and imposing, his face obscured by a hood. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice breaking slightly. "What do you want from me?" He paused, tilting his head slightly, as if considering my question. "You should have stayed away," he said, his voice low and gravelly, sending chills down my spine. "You've seen too much." "What do you mean?" I demanded, but my heart sank as I realized I might be dealing with someone unhinged. "I haven't seen anything. I just want this to stop." With that, he took a step closer, and instinct kicked in. I turned and sprinted back to my car, my heart pounding in my ears. I fumbled with the door handle, desperate to get inside. As I dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, I could hear the man's footsteps pounding behind me. I fumbled for the keys, my hands slick with sweat, and started the engine just as he reached my window. I looked up to see him staring at me, his face twisted into a cruel smile. In that moment, I felt a surge of pure terror. "Drive," he commanded, his voice dripping with menace. "You can't escape." Before I could react, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, and my car lurched forward, tires screeching against the asphalt. I tore down the road, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I glanced back. The man was still standing there, watching, but I didn't dare look again. I had to get away. I drove as fast as I could, weaving through the streets, my heart racing with fear and disbelief. I could feel the weight of his gaze burning into my back, and I knew that this wasn't just a game anymore. This was real. As I pulled onto a busier street, the lights of the city illuminated my surroundings. I felt momentarily safe among the crowds, the noise of the traffic drowning out the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. But then my phone buzzed again, and I knew I had to face the truth. There would be no escape from this nightmare until I confronted whatever was behind it. I glanced at the screen, another message from the unknown number. "You can't run from what you are." Those words sent a chill down my spine, and in that moment, I realized I needed to know the truth. I needed to dig deeper and find out what I had stumbled into, even if it meant facing my worst fears head-on. I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The messages kept coming, each one more cryptic and threatening than the last. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a web of fear with no way out. But I couldn't give in. I had to confront this head-on. I decided to investigate the unknown number. With nothing but my phone and sheer determination, I began my search. I scoured the internet, looking for any way to trace the messages. After hours of digging, I finally found a way to look up the number through a reverse lookup service. My heart raced as I entered it into the website, praying for answers. When the results loaded, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The number was unregistered, but the site had a warning. It was associated with various online scams and harassment reports. I was just another victim in a long line of people stalked by the same shadowy figure. It was then that I realized this wasn't just about me. It was part of something much larger. Desperate for more information, I turned to social media, searching for any posts related to similar experiences. After a few more hours of scrolling, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to stalker stories. I began reading through the posts, my heart sinking further with each account. People were describing eerily similar experiences: mysterious black cars, chilling messages, and the feeling of being hunted. It was as if a dark thread connected us all. One particular post caught my attention. A woman described how her family had been terrorized for weeks by a man who seemed to know their every move. They had noticed strange occurrences, doors left open, objects moved around, and eventually, the menacing presence of a black car. The woman wrote about how they eventually confronted the stalker, only to discover that he claimed to be protecting them from something they didn't understand. She described the man as having an otherworldly quality, something unsettling about his demeanor. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. My experiences mirrored hers in too many ways. I had to know more. I needed to find this woman, to see if she could shed light on what was happening to me. Using the details she provided in her post, I managed to track her down. I reached out to her, explaining my situation and how eerily similar it felt to what she had endured. To my surprise, she responded quickly, eager to share her story. We agreed to meet in a public place, a coffee shop bustling with life, where I hoped I could finally find some clarity. The moment I saw her, I recognized the same fear in her eyes that I had felt in mine. We quickly got to talking, and she shared her experiences. The relentless stalking, the messages, the feeling of being hunted. But what struck me the most was her description of the man. He's not just a stalker. He has a presence that feels otherworldly. It's as if he knows things about you that you don't even know yourself. As she spoke, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that the same entity was after me. I asked her how they had finally dealt with their stalker. She hesitated, glancing around as if she expected him to appear at any moment. "We confronted him," she said softly. "We demanded to know what he wanted, and he revealed that he was part of something, a group that believes they are protecting us from a greater evil. He said he was sent to keep an eye on us, to ensure we wouldn't fall victim to something far worse." Her words hung heavy in the air. I felt a surge of anger and confusion. How could someone claim to protect you while instilling so much fear? I needed to confront my own stalker, to demand answers, but a part of me hesitated. What if he wasn't just a man? What if there was something sinister at play? After our conversation, I left the coffee shop feeling both enlightened and terrified. I knew I had to face this man again, to get the truth, but I needed a plan. I couldn't approach him unarmed, so I gathered everything I had learned. I contacted the local police one last time, but their disinterest only fueled my frustration. I set a date to confront the stalker, choosing a deserted area where I had encountered him before. Armed with my phone to record everything, I felt a mix of fear and resolve. I parked my car, my heart racing as I waited. The street was dark, the silence pressing in around me like a thick fog. After what felt like an eternity, the familiar headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness. The black car rolled to a stop, and I took a deep breath, gripping my phone tightly. This was it. I would demand answers. I stepped out of my car, forcing myself to stand tall as the man emerged from the vehicle. He looked the same, cloaked in shadows, his features obscured by the darkness. But this time, I wasn't afraid. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "What do you want from me?" He took a step forward, and I could see the smirk on his lips. "I told you before," he said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "I'm protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" I demanded. "You're not a guardian. You're a monster." He chuckled, a low, mocking sound that sent chills through me. "You don't understand. There are things in this world that lurk in the shadows. Things that want to take you away. I'm keeping watch. Keeping watch." I spat, my anger boiling over. "You're just a stalker. You're the one causing this chaos." He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You think you're in control here? You're just a pawn in a game much bigger than you can imagine." I felt a wave of dread wash over me, the truth of his words sinking in. What had I stumbled into? But I couldn't back down. I raised my phone, ready to record, to expose him for the monster he was. "Leave me alone," I said, my voice trembling but defiant. "I won't be your pawn." For a moment, silence hung between us, and then he stepped back, his expression shifting. "You have no idea what you're inviting," he said softly, almost regretfully. "But if you wish to sever our ties, then so be it." And just like that, he turned and got back into his car, the engine roaring to life. My heart raced as I watched him drive away, the headlights disappearing into the darkness. In that moment, I realized I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my life. I still had so many questions, and the fear lingered, but I had stood up for myself. Whatever darkness was after me, I would face it head-on. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of resolve settle within me. I wouldn't let fear rule my life. I would uncover the truth behind the shadows and confront whatever lay in the darkness. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.